First, Edwin Diaz, now Jose Altuve. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, March 20th. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we'll talk about Jose Altuve's thumb injury, take a look at my Tout Wars team, what the gents think about it. The Fernando Tatis trio has been completed. Players we haven't talked about enough. Some interesting names that I don't know that we've dedicated enough attention to some of those guys. So talk about those names later on in the podcast. Before we get into it, make sure to like this video, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening on the audio side, please download, follow, and leave a 5-star review. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Remember that you can always go back and listen to our previous shows on demand. Last week, we talked a bunch about strategy and gave you position previews updates. Well, guess what? We need to update the second base preview again. Last week, one of you guys, I don't remember which one, said, we've been really fortunate with the WBC. We haven't really had any major injuries.
Yeah, I went on like a whole spiel about it. And, well, I mean, this one,
I thought I was the one who brought it up, but maybe you had
pitches. Well, you brought it up. I think I went on a whole extended rant, but I don't know, man. I'm so sick of people being like, "Oh, thanks to World Baseball Classic, it's getting players here," and it's like he got hit by a pitch. Like this is like when Byron Buxton got hit by a pitch a couple years ago, and like people were like, "Oh, he can't stay healthy." It's like this is literally the definition of just like RNG events. Like there is nothing you can do to like. We're really going to say Jose Altuve's chances of getting hit by a pitch were lesser if he had been facing some AAA pitcher from the Astros organization. Like, come on, this is dumb.
That's exactly right, Chris. And actually,
it's just bad luck.
Gabriel Moreno was hit by a pitch on his hand this weekend, too. It can happen to any player, spring training or WBC. So I don't think it has anything to do with the World Baseball Classic. But let's actually talk about the injury that we are referring to. Jose Altuve hit by a pitch on his right hand by Daniel Bard, of all players, USA going up against Venezuela on Saturday. Turns out that Jose Altuve has a fractured right thumb and will undergo surgery. I've seen anything from 6 to 10 weeks. I mean, Bob Nightingale reported 8 to 10 weeks. I don't know how much we trust Bob Nightingale's report, though the Astros have not provided an official timetable. Scott, talk to me how much you dropped him in your overall rankings and within your second base rankings.
So within second base, actually both in both 5x5 scoring and point scoring, I moved him down from first to sixth. Obviously, he slots among different players depending on which format you're looking at. But for the 5x5 scoring, I have Jose Altuve now between Andres Jimenez and Max Muncy. So that still has him in my top 100 overall. I'm obviously, as we've talked a lot about, Jose Altuve was a big part of my plan for this year. If I could get him in round 3, that was something I was pretty much always going to do. No longer, of course. But I think he is still a big part of my draft plan. If I can get him close to pick 100, then that's something I'm still excited to do. So the timelines you've referenced, Frank, I think for like a normal kind of straightforward fracture, particularly a small bone like that, I'd probably think in terms of 4 to 6 weeks because he's having surgery. Makes sense that would be longer. We don't really know the extent of the surgery. The Astros aren't willing to offer a timetable until after he gets out of surgery. So that is kind of an unknown element there. But I think the 8 to 10 week timeline that Bob Nightingale offered is pretty, it's kind of anticipating the worst. I don't imagine it being much worse than that. So I'm just going to go with that for Altuve and think, and I saw one of the Astros beat writers for The Athletic. I can't remember his name, but he kind of also said the Astros are hoping sometime in May Altuve returns, which would be closer to the 8 weeks of the 8 to 10 week timetable.
Yeah, I'm just looking at last year. Tyler Stevenson missed 29 days with a broken thumb. Bryce Harper missed 61 days with a broken thumb. And Harold Ramirez missed 29 days with a broken thumb.
So that's 4 to 8 weeks.
4 to 8 weeks. Yeah, that's the timetable. It's probably, I would guess, more like the 2-month timetable, especially since he's undergoing surgery and that'll take longer to heal. But I would expect mid-May.
Mid-May is a quarter of the season, basically. So a quarter of the season, worst case scenario, we're talking a third of the season for Jose Altuve, I would say. So that's June 1st, worst case scenario. June 1st is going to be here quicker than you think. If you have an IL spot to play with, if you, particularly the shallower your league is, I think it's very wise to invest in Altuve, provided the discount is as much as I think it is. And it could be even more than I think it is. People tend to overreact to injuries right after they happen. I know a lot of the commentary on Twitter now, because so many fantasy baseball analysts kind of view everything through the NFBC contest, which doesn't offer IL spots. I feel like sometimes
and has 15-team leagues.
And our 15-team leagues, so they're deeper, yes. I feel like a lot of times the reaction to these injuries can be a little overblown, and that might suppress Jose Altuve's draft stock further, which would be great for people who want to draft him. I think it's possible this injury could lead to me having even more shares of Jose Altuve than I was already getting, which to this point is 2.
Speaking of the NFBC, there were 9 drafts conducted on Sunday, so one day after the injury. This is still very fresh in people's minds, obviously, with Jose Altuve. The ADP was 133.46 with a min pick of 39, so that person clearly did not see the injury or know anything about it, and a max pick as low as 214. So
yeah, that was the first one that happened.
Yeah.
The first draft after his injury, I saw the NFC tweeted out he went in the 15th round of a 15-team league, which just congratulations to that guy, because that's going to work out. Because look, it's possible he comes back from this injury in 8 weeks and just isn't right. Bryce Harper, if you remember last year, came back from his broken thumb in like late August and was miserable for the rest of the season. I think he had like a 650 OPS. He did also hit 6 home runs in the playoffs in the World Series. He was pretty awesome in that stretch, but the regular season games he came back from, he wasn't quite the same guy.
And
Obviously,
he had other injuries,
had the elbow injury as well. But it's possible that he just comes back and isn't the same for the first month that he's back, and it takes him a little while. And, it could end up being a tough situation. But even there, I think the upside is still so high that it's worth a top 100 pick. And if it ends up being more like a 10th round pick in a 12-team league, that's even better.
All right, so who will be filling in for Jose Altuve in the meantime? Roster Resource has David Hensley playing second base for the Astros, though they do have Mauricio Dubon as well, more of a utility type player, but can play the infield if they need him to do that. Hensley last year in the minors hit 298 with a 420 on base percentage, 10 home runs, 20 steals, and an 898 OPS. A 26-year-old playing at AAA in the PCL, so it's a pretty favorable offensive environment. Chris, any interest in David Hensley in obviously the deepest of leagues?
I think it would only be AL only. I mean, the fact that he's got a little bit of speed and a little bit of pop is makes him interesting, but the surface level numbers look pretty interesting. The near 900 OPS, 420 OBP, 26 years old in the PCL. That suggests to me that it probably wasn't real. They have another guy who spent a decent amount. I think he spent most of last year at AAA, Pedro Leon, who is 3 or 4 years younger. I think he's 24. He had, I want to say, groin surgery at the start of spring training, so he's only just now getting into games. If I do wonder if he had been healthy, he might have had a chance, but he's probably a little more interesting. I think he hit like 228 in AAA, Pedro Leon, but had I want to say 2020 numbers. So
17 home runs, 38 steals.
Yeah, there you go. So like if he gets off to a hot start and Hensley and Mauricio Dubon are not doing anything, Leon would be more interesting if he got the opportunity. But right now, your replacement's not going to come from Houston, I would say.
I'm a little more interested in Hensley than Chris is. I know he had one exit velocity reading of 114 miles per hour last year. It's hard to fake that no matter what age you are, at what level. And just on base skills that good. I mean, Dusty Baker's kind of an old school manager. I don't know if how much he's going to value that, but if Hensley gets run, I think he could be interesting in kind of like a prime Jed Lowry sort of way. So I would say if your league is deep enough that you're drafting Bryce Terang, then you should also think about drafting David Hensley too, which would cover those 15-team roto leagues.
David Hensley available in the Scott White Dynasty League. Ooh,
He's not going to be available once waivers opens up, I'm sure.
All right, so once again, Jose Altuve, the big breaking news this weekend, has a fractured right thumb, and we're expecting maybe sometime in mid-May on the optimistic end, and if not that, probably sometime in June. The early ADP is 133.46. Both Chris and Scott would be buying at that cost. Let's get into my Tout Wars team, and we're not going to spend too much time on this because, again, I do want to talk about a lot of these players that maybe we haven't focused on enough throughout the draft prep season. And I mentioned earlier, the Fernando Tatis trio is complete. I didn't really go in expecting to win Fernando Tatis. I had budgeted for like a $25 outfielder. And what's cool is he has shortstop and outfield already. So I don't have to worry about him playing whatever it is, 5 or 10 games in the outfield to earn that eligibility first. He'll just have it right from the get-go. So having that dual eligibility, I got Fernando Tatis at $29. This is a 12-team head-to-head points salary cap draft / auction, but it uses roto lineups. So it's deeper than the normal standard head-to-head points league type setting that we often refer to on this podcast. So I got him at $29, followed by Rafael Devers at $27 and Corey Seager at $19. No surprise. I mean, I was willing to go $25 on Corey Seager, so don't tell anybody else that. I noticed that the second tier of pitching throughout this draft was going for more than I thought it should. So names like Yu Darvish, $25, Alek Manoah, $25, Max Fried, $26. So winning Corbin Burns at 32 felt like a relative deal just comparatively to those other starting pitchers. But it's what I did next that I thought was really interested, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on the strategy. So since I had already won Tatis, I decided to kind of lean into the injury discounts. Got Joe Musgrove at $12, Carlos Rodon at $9. It's very risky. There's no doubt about that. I'm kind of punting the first few matchups. Like, I'm going to set my lineup, but probably not going to do very well without some of those names. But come May, I mean, this team could be pretty dangerous if everyone's back healthy between Tatis and Rodon and Musgrove. So I didn't like the prices, and so I just kind of leaned into this volatility and this injury risk and discount here. Scott, what do you think about something like this?
A strategy of getting all the injured guys, I don't know that I'd recommend that. However, I think you got Musgrove and Carlos Rodon at such good values in a league where, it's only 12 teams. Most of the Tout Wars leagues are 15 teams, right? The one Chris and I play in are 15 teams, so they're deeper. Yours is shallower.
Chris
Mine is 12 as well.
Oh, yours is 12 too? Okay. But you were saying it's head-to-head points, but with roto lineups. So you, compared to what we're used to dealing with in head-to-head points, you go much deeper into the hitter pool, but there are still only 9 pitcher spots to fill, starters and relievers combined. So you don't go that much deeper into the pitcher pool. I think the waiver wire is going to be pretty robust for pitchers, and I think starting pitcher is the deepest position by far, given the current environment. So like getting cheap, high upside guys like that and just kind of streaming while you're waiting for them to come back, which in the case of Musgrove and Rodon might not be very long. Musgrove might not miss a turn, right? And then Rodon, they're talking maybe 2 turns he misses. So I think that was great for not spending much on pitching. You have a lot of upside in that pitching staff, and I think your hitting lineup. I mean, I was looking, even your middle infield, corner infield spots. Like you have legit players there. You don't have what we think of as scrubby guys. So I'm pretty happy with your team.
And if you're going to be forced into a situation where you have to stream starting pitcher, you'd rather that be in a head-to-head points league than a roto league where, yes, you can get negative points in a head-to-head points league, but 2 start pitchers are more impactful in head-to-head points leagues. You don't have to worry about them wrecking your ratios for the whole season or anything like that. So, in that format, and you also have the fact that you just have to make the playoffs in a head-to-head points league, right? Like you need to get there. It's important. You can't just take losses for the first month of the season. But if your team doesn't have a great record, but you sneak into the playoffs, but you're strong in weeks 19 and 20 when the playoffs start, you're going to be in a really good spot, regardless of, your record. It all resets once you hit that point. So I think, in this format, it's a strategy that's well worth chasing.
And speaking of, just having a full lineup for the playoffs, Ariel Cohen won Jose Altuve at $8. And again, this is still pretty fresh in everyone's mind. Like
that's great. Yeah.
Talking through it with you guys now, I'm like, yeah, you probably should have gone for at least double that. So, and his logic was, hey, I just need to make the playoffs, and then I'll have a potentially, $25 player that I only got at $8 within the draft. So
for what it's worth, I have Altuve as a $15 player.
Yeah, 14 for me
currently.
Yeah, so basically, Close to double what Ariel Cohen paid at $8. And considering what you guys said about, the injury risk and waiting for some of these guys to come back, Musgrove and Yordan, I loaded up my bench with some upside guys, Bailey Ober, Matthew Boyd, we talked about. He's looked good in the spring. Domingo Germán got blown up the other day, but obviously pitches for what we think will be a good team with the Yankees. Dylan Dodd, we'll see what happens with the Braves. And Cole Irvin, who, he's a little bit more boring, but whatever. In the right matchups, I'll stream him. And I got Will Myers to fill in for Fernando Tatis the first couple of weeks of the season. So good with that.
Speaking of Dylan Dodd, I happened to catch some of Jared Schuster's most recent start Friday, where he struck out 7.
He was really good.
Over, how many innings was it?
I think 4.
4 innings. Yeah, 7 over 4 shutout innings. And it's just looked great every time out. But what really stood out to me is how well he hides the ball. Like he keeps it right behind his side hip until he's ready to unfurl it. And I think that's, I've kind of described him as kind of a funky lefty, since like by pure metrics, the stuff isn't that amazing, but that might help it play up the way it has this spring and the way it did in the minors. And I got to feel like Schuster is more my leaning now. I mean, Dylan Dodd followed up with another great start Saturday, so it's not decided yet, but I'm kind of leading Schuster now in that battle.
Come on, Scott, you told me Dodd on Friday, so that's why I went on. No. But I saw what you saw, and I watched the highlights. I watched all the strikeouts from Schuster's performance on Friday. I was impressed by the breaking pitch. I don't know if it's slider or curveball or whatever it might be, but
pretty new. Like the changeup has always stood out, but yeah, the slider's something he's made strides with more recently.
Yeah, it looked really good for Schuster. So we'll see. I mean, Dylan Dodd on Saturday, 4 2/3, 1 run, 4 strikeouts. So he looked really good as well. But Schuster does have more prospect pedigree, former first-round pick. So we'll see what the Braves wind up doing there.
Dylan Dodd, like I love hearing it because it sounds like some kind of maneuver, like
like a wrestling move.
He's Dylan and Dodden.
Yeah.
If like you rock and roll,
If you've never watched a Knicks game before, Scott, the broadcaster Walt Clyde Frazier, he has all these kind of crazy sayings, hooping and swooping and all this kind of stuff. So it just
love Dylan Dodd.
Yeah, he certainly would. Other fun buys that I got on my Tout Wars team, finally drafted Riley Green, got him at $7. Miguel Vargas at $5. Let's go, Scotty. Hit his first spring home run over the weekend. And then wound up with Zach Eflin at $3, which wasn't really the plan. But I realized about halfway through, and bad job by me, someone else brought it up within the draft too. Tout Wars, you only need 5 relief appearances for relief pitcher eligibility. So Zach Eflin is a sparp at $3. And that also means like Christian Javier is a sparp, which I think he went for 25. I don't know if I would have been in on him anyway at that price, but like Jeffrey Springs also a sparp. So probably should have realized that sooner, but yeah. Zach Eflin. Nice.
Well, wait a second. It's just pitcher spots, right?
So it's 7 just pitcher spots and then 2 relief pitcher spots.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that from your.
So that's how you got to divvy it up. And Kenley Jansen, my other reliever, Matthew Boyd has RP eligibility, so could mess around with that as well. With that being said, let's take our first break here on the podcast. And when we get back, we'll talk about some other news and notes here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Hey, Calvin, you play golf. You think you can win one of those green jackets at the Masters?
Well, if it's for being the most loving neighbor of the year, yes.
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Ever dream about buying a Fantasy Baseball Today podcast shirt and then jumping over to get a Yellowstone whiskey glass or Top Gun Maverick hat? Well, now you can with the brand new Paramount shop, which offers a mountain of merch from the Paramount shows and movies that you love. Shop official apparel, drinkware, and accessories inspired by over 150 fan favorite titles: Paw Patrol, Yellowstone, Top Gun, Star Trek, South Park, SpongeBob SquarePants, and your favorite CBS sports podcasts like Pick Six, Fantasy Football Today, and, of course, Fantasy Baseball Today. Scan the QR code in the top right corner if you're watching on YouTube, or head to ParamountShop.com. Use the discount code LAUNCH20 for 20% off your entire purchase until next Wednesday. Paramount Shop, where products are paramount. Let's get into some news and notes from the weekend. Astros manager Dusty Baker said Yordan Alvarez could play in a spring training game this upcoming week. Alvarez took on-field batting practice Friday as he works through hand soreness. Aaron Boone told reporters on Saturday that Carlos Rodon is feeling good after throwing on Friday. He'll start the season on the IL, but there's a chance he only misses 2 to 3 starts. That's the glass half full take. We'll see how Carlos Rodon continues to progress. Jorge Polanco, I brought up the name on Friday. I said it's a little weird that he hasn't played in a spring training game, huh? He could begin the season on the IL after feeling, quote, normal soreness a couple of times after taking batting practice. Polanco missed time last year with ankle, back, and knee injuries. Chris, we were talking beforehand, and you mentioned that you were going to drop Jorge Polanco in the rankings a little bit.
Yeah, I only dropped him a couple spots at second base, but yeah, it's very concerning that after a full offseason off, Jorge Polanco is still dealing with knee soreness. Now, he had tendonitis in his knee, so that's the kind of thing that tends to linger. No pun intended, but that is it's definitely concerning that at the start of spring training, for a guy who hasn't even been playing in games yet, he's already dealing with issues with that. So definitely concerning. Go ahead.
The Twins GM did make a point to say, though, that he hasn't suffered a setback. It's just they're running out of time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't think it's going to be long that they're going to go without Jorge Polanco.
But that he's already dealing with it for me is just like, is this going to be the kind of thing that lingers? Is he going to be able to run? Is he going to be able to play every day? I think those are all fair questions. I tend to take a more skeptical view of them when they happen. You know, I tend to think like past injuries tend to be overrated when we're talking about injury concerns. Present injuries, less so. And he is currently hurt at a time when you would hope he would be healthy from something that seems like a stress or workload type of injury, rather than, you know, we get a lot of spring training ligament or muscle strains. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an injury that he had an entire offseason to heal from and is already a problem.
So which names did you drop him behind, Chris?
Let's see. He is behind. I had him fairly high. I've drafted him a ton. I dropped him behind Gleyber Torres, Max Muncy, and Ketel Marte. So he went from right around 100-ish to more like 140.
That is Jorge Polanco that we're talking about. Let's move over to Jurickson Profar, who signed a 1-year, $7.75 million deal with the Rockies. And there are already rumors that he could lead off for the team. I mean, this a huge change from not having a job to potentially leading off for the Rockies. That's a huge deal. Profar last year hit .243 with 15 home runs, 82 runs scored, and 5 steals. Scott, I'm kind of interested here because just a 15.7% strikeout rate. Profar makes a lot of contact, and now you put him in that BABIP inflated Coors Field, and he might lead off. I'm kind of interested.
Yeah, I mean, he also walked 73 times last year, so there's like a good foundational on base situation there for Jurickson Profar. And if he does see the BABIP boost that so many hitters do see at Coors Field, it could make him a pretty interesting fantasy option. He's not eligible anywhere but outfield, I don't believe. But outfield is a position where there is a lot of need, and this would be the sort of player who could impact both scoring formats since he does have those good on base skills. So last year, Jurickson Profar's BABIP was 272. The year before, 266. Career BABIP 264. I mean, he just gets that closer to 300. That as is pretty easy to do at Coors Field. Then he could be a surprisingly productive player this year.
Yeah, I think something like 270, 15 to 20 home runs, 10-ish steals is well within the realm of possibility for him, which in a 5 outfielder league especially, that's going to play. He's one of those players who's probably his skill set's probably best suited for a head-to-head point scoring format. And I think it's unlikely he's a top 36 outfielder. So I'm not sure he's going to matter much there, but like he's the kind of player who, if you need an outfielder on waivers, could end up being pretty helpful.
He'll be showing up on the top 10 sleeper hitters
anytime they're at home. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually in a slow draft right now over at the NFBC, and he went at pick 285. He didn't get drafted as soon as the news came out, so a couple of people either didn't see or maybe were skeptical on it. So pick 285 for Jerks and Profar. He goes just after Austin Hayes and Charlie Blackmon at the outfield position. He also went.
I'd rather have him than either of those guys. Yeah.
And he went for $2 in our Tout Wars salary cap draft. So
that seems fine.
Yeah. D-backs pitching prospect. My heart. Brendan Pfaadt was reassigned to minor league camp. A little bit surprising to me. Had a really, I guess not really good spring, but his most recent start or appearance rather was really good. Who do you guys think wins that fifth starter job as of now? Is it Ryan Nelson or Dre Jameson?
Well, Ryan Nelson turned in the best start most recently on Friday, 4 1/3 innings, 1 earned run, 6 strikeouts. Dre Jameson has been faltering recently. I don't know if they're going to base it all on spring performance. I would hope they wouldn't, but there are observations they make that often underlie those performances, and I guess the leaning would be Ryan Nelson now, but the leaning before they sent down Pfaadt was Pfaadt. So maybe it'll just be Tommy Henry, and we can all be disappointed.
Oh gosh, Scott, come on! Don't even put that out into the universe. No Tommy Henry. Sorry if you're listening.
He's had the most consistent spring. Not anybody I want either.
Freddie Freeman returned to playing first base on Sunday, one day after playing DH. He sat out a few days with hamstring tightness, so looks like he's good to go. Kyle Wright will make his spring debut on Monday. He's been delayed after receiving a cortisone injection in his shoulder back in January. Daniel Hudson and Brusdar Graterol are the most likely candidates to serve as the Dodgers closer if the team eventually decides to move away from a committee approach. That comes according to Bill Plunkett of the Orange County Register. Chris, here we were thinking that Evan Phillips, he still might have some upside. He was ridiculous last year, the ratios and the strikeouts, but then we get a report like this. So perhaps the Dodgers are leaning with one of Hudson or Graterol long-term.
Yeah, I mean, the way that's phrased, though, doesn't really mean all that much to me. If they move away from a committee approach, it might be one of those two guys. Well, one of those two guys may not be ready for the start of the season, probably won't be ready for the start of the season. A lot of things can happen between now and when they're ready to move away from a committee approach. I would guess they will at some point move away from a committee approach, but it likely won't be because they're choosing to. It will be because one guy either fails or one guy becomes such an obvious option. But, predicting who that is right now, I think it's pretty tough to do.
Let's stick with the bullpens. Jimmy Herget could begin the season as the Angels closer with Carlos Estevez struggling this spring. That comes according to Rhett Bollinger of MLB.com. Carlos Estevez has a 15.43 ERA in 6 appearances during the spring. And I've mentioned the name before. I'll throw it out there again. Matt Moore signed with the Angels this offseason, and he was really, really good as a reliever with the Rangers last year. And they have multiple lefties, so they don't have to worry about just saving him to face other lefties. I think there's a chance. So in deeper leagues, that's a name I'm looking at. Matt Moore, and obviously now Jimmy Herget, if they're mentioning him specifically by name. Yohan Duran sustained a leg contusion after being struck by a line drive during a backfield game on Sunday. Manager Rocco Baldelli said Duran was, quote, moving pretty well.
Who struck him with that line drive, Frank?
Well, the way that you're asking
we're doing victory laps on pitchers.
I'm just saying, someone was out there
pitchers getting hit by line drives during intra-squad scrimmages now.
Someone was out there taking it back.
It is a good sign that Alex Kirilloff was able to play in a game.
There you go.
He has not done it yet in the spring, as far as I know. But he has been him and Buxton. That's the other part of the Jorge Polanco thing is Buxton and Kirilloff have both been not playing in spring games, but they've been in intra-squad games pretty regularly, playing on the backfield. So they seem, surprisingly, Byron Buxton and Alex Kirilloff seem healthier than Jorge Polanco right now.
Which isn't saying much, but let's
Emphasis on right now.
Brendan,
We're gonna stay zen. We're gonna stay in the moment.
Well, I think the point I was trying to make earlier with Polanco is I think in all three of those cases, Polanco, Buxton, and Kirilloff, it's more about the Twins taking things very, very slowly than anything else. I mean, they're not as concerned with getting these guys ready for opening day as making sure they last through the season, which is probably better. And if it serves to drive down their draft value, all the better.
Hey, I should have mentioned this when we were talking about Polanco, but if they do need someone to fill in at second, that probably means more playing time for Nick Gordon. And he had some interesting numbers last year too. So definitely someone that should be in your radar in leagues that have a middle infielder or 5 outfielders.
He had some interesting comments too about.
Sorry, is that Royce Lewis?
In my notes here, but basically
Nick Gordon,
adjusting his swing for more power and saying he has a goal to hit a ball 440 feet. And apparently I didn't label it right in my notes because I'm not control F-ing to it right now. But
so
it was interesting stuff.
I do want to point out, sorry, I blanked out there for a minute. And Royce Lewis was playing in that same inter-squad game. I don't know if he was like playing, but he was definitely, I saw video of him in a live at bat against Yohan Duran, which is a little surprising. I thought, I thought we were kind of looking at a couple months away from Royce Lewis being able to play, but that suggests that the timetable might be a little more advanced than we thought.
And in leagues where you have multiple or unlimited IL spots, man, Royce Lewis, take a shot, last round pick, and just kind of stash him for now. Because when he played last year, he looked really, really good. This is a former top prospect in all of baseball, coming back from his second torn ACL with the Minnesota Twins. Brandon Nimmo was diagnosed with sprains in his right knee and ankle while trying to break up a double play. He told reporters Sunday that he believes he'll be ready for opening day. Gabriel Moreno was also hit on the hand with a pitch this weekend, but said it grazed his knuckles and does not believe the injury is serious. Red Sox manager Alex Cora once again told reporters that he expects Masataka Yoshida to hit cleanup to open the 2023 season. To open. That's the key word there. We'll see if the Red Sox stick with that. Andrew Vaughn is dealing with lower back soreness, but said he expects to return to swinging a bat within the next couple of days. David Peterson had another strong outing on Sunday, going 4 scoreless with 4 strikeouts, but also 4 walks. He's allowed just 1 hit over 12 innings this spring. And I think I said he was RP eligible on Friday. And then I looked that up, and I don't think it's true. So I might have just seen it in one league, but maybe the eligibilities were a little bit different. So my apologies. But I still do like David Peterson if he wins that job. Vaughn Grissom has made 4 straight starts at DH in spring training. He's hitting well, 10 for 31. But Scott, any worry here that maybe the Braves are having questions about his ability to play shortstop?
Well, from what I gather, it's not anything Vaughn Grissom has done wrong. It's just that Braden Shoemake, one of their first round picks from a couple years ago, 2019, who is considered a really good defender at shortstop, has hit the ball, has looked, it's not just that he has decent numbers, he's looked a lot better as a hitter this year, and they always thought he had upside as a hitter. So apparently they're giving him a longer look now, and Brian Snitker did say it's between Shoemake and Grissom for the job. In fantasy, we're definitely rooting for Grissom, not only because so many people have drafted him already, but also because the last 2 years in the minors, Braden Shoemake has hit 243 with a 693 OPS in the minors. Maybe he has taken this dramatic step forward, and that'll prove to be moot in time. But I am not optimistic about Shoemake's fantasy chances specifically. This does scare me, though. I mean, between the Altuve injury, the Polanco news, and now the chance Grissom might begin the year in the minors after all, second base is taking it on the chin this weekend. Fortunately, it is a position with a lot of intriguing depth late. This is one point we didn't bring up when we were talking about Altuve earlier. Part of the reason that makes it easy to go ahead and draft him if you can stash him on an IL spot is the replacement. There probably isn't a hitter position with better replacement level talent than second base. I mean, one of my favorite sleepers there is barely getting drafted at all, and that's That's Michael Massey, and he's not being drafted in the majority of leagues.
I mean,
so it's a place with interesting talents that you could take a flyer on while you're waiting for Altuve or whomever to return.
We talked about it a lot in I think the most recent pod, but like Ketel Marte going outside of the top 200 on average. Sure. Gene Segura is like 250. You could do worse for fill-ins. CJ Abrams still has some upside. So also Ryan McMahon's going to add a second base eligibility, and like we're done with like Ryan McMahon having upside, but he's useful, especially if they're at home. So there's a decent number of options at second base deep. Like I think second base definitely shallow on impact bats, but I think it's actually legitimately a pretty deep position in terms of like there's a very, very steady, like shortstop has that drop off at 14 or 15 where it's just like a cliff. Second base, once you get outside of like the top 8, it's just a very steady grade down.
Yeah, it is the most bottom heavy position, which is great for sleepers.
According to MLB.com, Max Stassi appears set to win the starting catcher job for the Angels with Logan O'Hoppe and Matt Tice. I think that's how you say that name. Battling for the backup role. Boo.
Yeah,
Paul Blackburn. Yeah, it's like, what are we doing?
Like all these players we assumed had jobs, and now Logan O'Hoppe maybe not such a great second catcher choice after all.
Paul
you know
Blackburn,
what they say about when you assume?
Yeah.
Like Frank assumed we were going to get to a lot of players we don't talk about today, but
yeah, I mean,
barely going to make it through news and notes.
That's right. That's, a lot of stuff going on this weekend, Scott. Paul Blackburn will start the season on the IL with a fingernail avulsion on his.
That sounds gross.
Hand. Yeah, it's just even the word avulsion, not great.
Yeah.
Brewers pitching, not pitching. Brewers.
I have aversion to avulsion.
Yeah.
Joey Weimer has a chance to make the Brewers opening day roster. Craig Counsell said, quote, "We have uncertainty in the outfield right now, and that's created some opportunity for guys." Joey Weimer this spring, 7 for 29. That's 241 with 2 homers, 2 steals, 7 strikeouts to 3 walks. What about Sal Frelick, man? Chopped liver? Come on, man. What's going on?
He just hasn't been there.
That's true. Yeah, he was playing for Team Italy, but he did pretty well in the World Baseball Classic. So we'll see with the Brewers outfield. Players we haven't talked about enough and probably won't be able to talk about them enough. Once again, let's talk about Shane Bieber. That's where we'll start. One of 8 pitchers with 200-plus innings from last season. And this was a different Shane Bieber that we've seen from the past, Chris, where the velocity was down. And I remember early in the season, we were freaking out. Turned out to have a really good season. 2.88 ERA, 104 whip, nearly a strikeout per inning. Doesn't get as many strikeouts as he used to, but he's still pretty reliable. What are your thoughts on Shane Bieber this season?
Yeah, it's interesting because he's definitely, I feel like the reason we don't talk about him very much is he's just kind of viewed as a boring, safe guy. But there is, I think, still a little bit of volatility in the profile, and that's both good and bad. Like I think there's a chance he could rediscover some of the lost velocity and get back to being, probably certainly not a 41% strikeout rate guy like he was in 2020, but a 30% strikeout rate guy, I think is within the realm of possibility. But I think there's also a chance that like he could take another step back and his, contact issues could become a real problem for him. Like if you were asking me for a player who could have a like Lucas Giolito type fall apart season, I think Bieber would be on that list among the players being drafted in that range.
Yeah, I mean, he does give up a lot of hard contact, and if he's not getting as many whiffs as he used to, it is a possibility. The one thing with Bieber, his control is so good that I just can't really see it falling apart that bad, but I hear what you're saying. The ADP for Shane Bieber is 49. He's going just ahead of Julio Urias and Zach Wheeler. Does that make sense to you guys? Are you on board with that?
I have Wheeler ahead of Bieber, and I imagine Chris does too.
Yeah, I do too. So
yeah, I'm not sure where the hesitance with Wheeler, why that's showing up, because he seems about as steady of an ace as you'll find.
I like Wheeler.
Bieber,
I was just gonna say, Scott, I like Wheeler a lot, but last year shoulder, and he landed on the IL with I think forearm tendonitis for a while. So those are 2 pretty scary injuries.
Yeah, but he obviously came back and pitched like Zach Wheeler.
And Bieber had the shoulder issue the year before. I know it was a year before, but that risk doesn't just go away entirely.
Yeah, I I'm fine drafting Bieber where it's going. Like I think if there is a chance he can regain some velocity and become more dominant, it's not really baked into his cost. I feel like he's being drafted for who he was last year. He tends to go earlier than I take my first pitcher. I usually end up with what I think is a pretty good comp to Shane Bieber, just in terms of pure numbers. Alec Manoah. I think they have some similarities there. But I'd be fine taking Bieber if Alec Manoah went first.
Let's move over to Luis Garcia, starting pitcher with the Houston Astros. Quietly solid with the team last year, 3.72 ERA, 1.13 WHIP, right around a strikeout per inning. Really good, 13% swinging strike rate. I think the one thing I worry about with Luis Garcia is this pitch clock coming in. I think it was a headline somewhere this weekend that he's kind of changed up his delivery and his motion. So hopefully
he can't do that rocking the baby thing.
Yeah, he wasn't doing that in the World Baseball Classic.
It's actually illegal. It's not just that it slows him down. It's legally it'd be called a balk for him doing.
But
that.
he wasn't. Those rules are not in place in the World Baseball Classic, and he wasn't doing it there either.
He wasn't doing it there. Well, that's good. I should hope not. And the little bit we saw of him in the Cactus. Or are they in the Grapefruit League? The Astros like one of the few West teams in the Grapefruit League. Whatever league he's in. He looked fine in those two starts. A very boring looking delivery now. But I don't think, just based on the results we've seen between spring training and the World Baseball Classic, I don't think that's going to be an entry. I think we can get that worry out of our minds. My issue with Luis Garcia, and I have him ranked lower than I think the consensus, not a lot, but a little, is just that he is more like a 5 to 6 innings pitcher than a 6 to 7 innings pitcher. At least he has been. And I don't know, with Verlander out of the picture now, if the Astros are going to give Luis Garcia more the veteran treatment and lean on him a little harder, have him work deeper into games. And look at his game log now. Only twice did he throw 100 pitches last year. So there's room there for him to go deeper into games. But it's the kind of thing I'm not willing to assume. So if he's, he managed to win 15 games in spite of it last year, pitching for the Astros. If you're going to throw only less than 160 innings in 30 starts, or about that in 30 starts, I don't know. I don't know that I can count on you for 15 wins again. And the ERA is going to be middling. The WHIP's going to be middling. The strikeout rate is going to be middling. He's just very middling to me, unless he takes that big step forward workload wise.
The ADP for Luis Garcia is right around 160. I think a problem for me too is where he goes. There's a lot of fun pitchers that I am interested in. Someone like Dustin May, or even like Pablo Lopez has looked good so far. Jeffrey Springs. Drew
Gosh, he's even higher than I thought he was. Maybe I do have him a lot lower than the consensus.
Yeah, so going a little bit higher. He pitches for a good team. And he gives you a strikeout per inning. So I kind of get it from that perspective, but I don't know that there's as much upside with Luis Garcia comparatively to the names that are going around him. I just mentioned one of those names, Drew Rasmussen with the Tampa Bay Rays, and it's kind of like an industry darling. I've seen a lot of very smart people on Drew Rasmussen, and he broke out in 2021, picked up right where he left off last year, 2.84 ERA, 104 WHIP. The strikeout rate was a little bit low at 7.7 K per nine, but 12% swinging strike rate. I think the strikeouts could be better. I think we could get closer to a strikeout per inning this season for Drew Rasmussen, and he changed up his pitch mix last year. He threw more. He added a cutter through 33% of the time. So there's legit 3 pitches there. Pitches for a good organization. Tampa Bay Rays do a good job with their pitchers. Chris, any thoughts on Drew Rasmussen? Because I found myself gravitating more towards him as I've kind of dug into him a little bit more.
He's not a player that I ever really think about drafting, just because I'm usually, I don't know if there's upside there, I guess is the way I would put it. Like, he has a deep arsenal of pitches that all seem fine in terms of swing strike rate. Like cutter, sweeper, and curveball are all right around 30% swinging strike rate. Fastball's 19%. So I could see a path to a breakout. It's a little cloudy, I guess. And there are pitchers I prefer who I guess I just get a little more excited about. He's sort of like Luis Garcia in that I don't know that you're ever going to get a ton of innings from him or a ton of wins. So I think there's probably a ceiling there.
2 years in a row, the ERA is exactly 2.84 though. So my one rebuttal to that is Luis Garcia was nearly a run higher than that.
Sure.
So, I mean, if we're getting a good whip and a sub-3 ERA, and I think he could push closer to a strikeout per inning, then like I kind of get it. I kind of get why people are interested in Drew Rasmussen.
Yeah, I don't like. He's interesting. I don't really understand why the enthusiasm is going toward him, because normally it's big strikeout guys, and strikeouts or the lack thereof is the biggest concern for Drew Rasmussen. So I look, okay, well, what else does he do well? Really good walk rate. That's important. Puts the ball on the ground. I mean, not a ridiculous amount, but mostly he's more of a ground ball pitcher, which could be a challenge in, with the shifts going away. His ERA, as you pointed out, Frank, was 2.84 last year. xERA was 3.46. xFIP was 3.56. Like if you're not a strikeout pitcher, then I think you need to be really good at a couple things. And I'll count in this new environment a high fly ball rate. If it's shown you can suppress home runs with it, I'll count that as one thing you do well. So that's why I'm giving Nestor Cortez and like Alek Manoah more credit.
Tristan McKenzie.
Yeah. Plus, they're better strikeout pitchers than Rasmussen was on top of it. But Rasmussen, other than throwing a lot of strikes, I don't really see what he does well.
I think the thought would be just that he could get more strikeouts, because he does throw pretty hard. The stuff seems like it should get more strikeouts. He does a very good job of limiting quality of contact. That's the one place that he really did excel last season. And so, I could see like,
I mean,
if
39th
you think
percentile average exit velocity, 37th percentile.
344 expected WOBA on contact. That's very good relative to the league average of 368. So I think like I can see it, like if he can do that and get the strikeout rate back to like 24 to 25% like it was in 2021. But the thing there is 2021, he was pitching half his starts in relief and often wasn't going deep. So, or more than half his starts. So it's like, is he likely to, be able to sustain, like we saw a 1.5 per hour drop in his fastball velocity. He's already 28. I think he probably is what he is, more or less.
The final 6 starts for Rasmussen last year, he went 6+ innings 5 times. And I think one of those he was going for a no-hitter too. He went super deep into that start. I'm kind of interested, but again, that's a range where there's a lot of really exciting pitchers. Yeah. Rasmussen kind of goes right around Luis Garcia as well. Let's take our final break here, and then we'll kind of run through some more of these players that we have not talked enough about. Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball today. Let's move over to Bryan Reynolds, who last year hit 262 with 27 home runs and 7 steals. He got off to a really slow start, but from May 1st on, he hit 272, 25 of those 27 home runs, and an 838 OPS. So, Chris, I think if we just kind of give Bryan Reynolds the benefit of the doubt, he's probably still closer to like that 275 or maybe even 280 hitter that we saw from May 1st on last season.
But man, the quality of contact metrics for Bryan Reynolds last year were not nearly as good as they were the year before. The average exit velocity was actually a little bit up, but he was a little less consistent about hitting the ball hard at optimum angles. So his barrel rate was actually the lowest it's been since he was a rookie. His expected batting average, 249. Expected WOBA, 329 compared to a 349 mark. For his career, he's actually been right around his expected mark. So I do wonder if he's getting a benefit of the doubt that may not be 100% deserved. That's not saying that I'm avoiding him, although I don't think I've drafted him this year. It's more just that like I think we're all just kind of like, yeah, he's Bryan Reynolds still. He's the guy he was in 2019, the guy he was in 2020, the guy he was for most of 2022. Maybe he isn't, though. And, I do wonder, like, it's a bad park. It's a bad lineup. We expect him to be traded, but we don't know that that's going to happen. I think it could go worse than we think it will.
Let's move over to Whit Merrifield, who last year, kind of a nosedive, a faceplant, whatever you want to call it, 250 batting average, 11 home runs, 16 steals, and 139 games, was actually being benched down the stretch for the Toronto Blue Jays, and then an injury struck, so they really had to throw him back into the lineup. He was good in September, but I read an article recently that Santiago Espinal is likely to start at second base against lefties this year, so I imagine that's going to come at the expense of Whit Merrifield. Scott, what are your thoughts on Merrifield this season?
I have wondered if Dalton Varsho being so bad against lefties last year, if he would sit against lefties. And of course, Merrifield's perfectly capable of playing the outfield. So maybe it ends up being, not that we want that in fantasy, but maybe it ends up being
a bad thing.
I can't imagine that, like, as much as they gave up to get Dalton
they're
Varsho,
going to give him a chance.
Yeah.
Okay. Either way, it seems unlikely Whit Merrifield's going to get anywhere near the playing time he did in Kansas City, because he played about as much as anybody can play. I think there's a pretty good chance he bounces back statistically. Prior to last year, his line drive rates had been among the best in the game year after year. And so I think there's a good chance his track record would suggest that he gets back to doing that more and the batting average comes up. Steals, he had only 16 of those. He said he plans to run more this year, but he also said he felt like he didn't need to run so much in such a deep lineup after he got traded from Kansas City to Toronto. So that's kind of a conflicting statement, I think. I don't know what to expect. He's done this before with stolen bases where he said, yeah, I just decided to stop running. But he's fast enough. He certainly can steal a lot of bases if he decides to start running again. So I could go either way with Merrifield. I feel like among middle infield options, I like an upside guy like Bryce Terang more. And so somebody else is probably going to draft Whit Merrifield. I think the only league I've gotten him in is an AL only, where I tend toward more boring players. But I could see him getting back to being more of a 280 hitter with closer to 30 steals. I don't know that he's going to be impactful for shallow leagues either way, though, because of the potential loss of playing time.
For what it's worth, he has attempted 5 steals in the spring. He's 2 for 5, or 2 for 2 and 3, or 2 for 5, whatever the way you would say that is.
Yeah.
He's been caught stealing 3 times. I care less about the caught stealings. That's a very noisy stat. But the 5 steals, in as much as stealing is about the desire to steal, that seems like a positive sign.
And the sprint speed was still really good for Merrifield last year, 84th percentile. The ADP is 167.4. What do you guys think of the cost?
Yeah, it's probably, like I said, a little high for me. And it's not even so much... Let me see who's being drafted in that same range. Oh gosh, Rowdy Tellez, right?
Yeah.
Are you not looking at Fantasy Pros? Are you looking at
Yeah, no, that's what I have. Yeah, Rowdy Tellez at 170.4.
So he's being drafted in between Rowdy Tellez and Jeffrey Springs. So yeah, that's way too high for me. If he's there 60 spots later, I might think about it.
All right.
Even, like I said, I know I can fall back on a Bryce Terang. I'm probably looking in that 220 range more at like Ezekiel Tovar. So I don't know. I don't see myself getting a lot of Merrifield, but I could see it. I'm not necessarily ready to say he's just done, I guess.
Let's move over to Josh Hader, who had a 13-game stretch from mid-July to late August where he allowed 22 earned runs over 9 innings pitched. That is a 22 ERA, 3.44 whip. Actually lost the Padres closer job at one point. Had some stuff going on off the field, a newborn child that was born with some complications. Obviously, this guy's a human, easily could have affected him on the field. Chris, are you buying the bounce back chances for Josh Hader this season?
Yeah, I mean, this is, when you ask players we haven't talked about, I suggested Hader. It's not necessarily that I have a ton to say about him necessarily, as much as just we haven't talked about him. I think he's a really interesting player because of what happened last year. And I will note, I think the bounce back chances, because he already did bounce back. Once he got out of that bad stretch, he was very dominant. I will point out his velocity's down this spring. He's unconcerned, but he's only pitched 1 game in front of the StatCast cameras. That was down 3 miles an hour, actually, it's a big deal. And I'm reading a report from his second outing where his velocity was still down. I haven't seen anything since then, but given is he the number one closer in ADP now with
Class A.
Class A. He's number 2 then with Edwin Diaz out. And there's a lot at stake there, given how shallow the top tier at closer is and how impactful those guys are going to be. I'm a little worried. I've gone into the elite tier of closer a few times, but not for Hader.
Yeah, same. I mean, I typically wait a little bit and wind up with a Ryan Presley or a Raisel Iglesias or Felix Bautista, Kenley Jansen, one of those guys. So I think he'll be fine, but I usually just don't shop in that range for closers. That is Josh Hader. We got about 5-ish minutes left, so let's try and get through as many of these as possible. A little bit of rapid fire. Scott, Eduardo Rodriguez is someone you wanted to talk about, has not given up a run over 13 spring innings so far, 15-2 strikeout to walk ratio. And I saw his start on March 3rd. His velocity on all of his pitches was up almost 1.5 miles per hour. So what are your thoughts on Eduardo Rodriguez?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts on Eduardo Rodriguez. Again, I was just suggesting a player we haven't talked about a lot, but he has had a really good spring. And of course, he's been a productive player in the past. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up having a bounce back season. Most leagues, the draft's going to end before I have any interest in taking Eduardo Rodriguez. But if you do play in a deeper league where you kind of just need to make sure you get some volume, Eduardo Rodriguez should be able to provide that and then some. Eventually,
his velocity was up even more in his World Baseball Classic start against Nicaragua on March 14th. His velocity was up to 93.6 miles per hour, 1.9 mile per hour on his fastball, plus 3.4 on the changeup. Similar for everything else. So, I mean, he's had a really tough couple of years.
Yeah.
Remember, we weren't sure he was ever going to pitch in the majors again when he had myocarditis after having COVID in 2020. Then he had the issue where he stepped away from the team last year. So he's someone that I still think is pretty talented and is probably being overlooked in fantasy.
Move over to Gleyber Torres, who has an ADP of 113.2. Bounced back last year, was the 77th overall player in Roto. He had 257 with 24 home runs and 10 steals. Got back to being aggressive for Gleyber Torres. His swing percentage and his chase rate were both his highest since 2019, and he actually hit the ball harder than he ever has. Chris, entering a contract year, do you have interest in Gleyber at his price tag of 113?
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that he's kept on running last season, despite, the bat coming back around, because I was worried that it might be a situation where he was trying to make things happen when he wasn't hitting. There are still just counting stat problems for him, though. He plays pretty much every day, 140 games last season, but only 572 plate appearances. That feels really low, even for 140 games, because he tends to hit lower in the lineup. So 73 runs, 76 RBI for 24 home runs. That's fine, but there's probably not a path for Gleyber Torres to get back to or to get to being like a high level contributor in runs and RBI anymore. So I do like that the bat took a step forward last season. I feel more confident in him than I did a year ago. He's a player I wouldn't mind seeing get traded, though. I know he's been thrown around in a lot of Yankees trade rumors, and obviously leaving that lineup in that park for most people would be a problem. And he does tend to get a decent share of opposite field home runs last season. Looks like last year it was actually about split evenly, but he's just someone who I think in a worse lineup might actually have a better fantasy context, because he'd have more opportunities to drive in and score runs than he does hitting, in the bottom third of the Yankees lineup.
I think it would cost more than this, but something that kind of made sense in my mind was Gleyber Torres and whatever prospects or a prospect for Bryan Reynolds. But seeing as how he's entering a contract year, I mean, the Pirates don't pay anyone, so they probably Gleyber Torres.
Yeah, Gleyber for Pablo Lopez would have also made some sense, but
right,
that kind of deal. With Volpe, with Peraza, it definitely feels like we're near the end of the Gleyber Torres era in the Bronx.
And I love Gleyber when he first got called up too. It's kind of sad if he winds up leaving the Yankees, but man, they do have so many interesting middle infield prospects. Scott, I'm going to throw a bunch of names your way, and these were names that you brought up to me, and that includes Brady Singer, Ty France, Luis Severino, Tim Anderson, Seth Brown. So 5 names there. If you want to kind of quickly hit on, I don't know, a couple of points for each of those again: Singer, Ty France, Severino, Tim Anderson, and Seth Brown.
So my interest in Ty France is completely dependent on how deep the league is. I think I think he's a pretty low ceiling player at a position where in shallow leagues you need a pretty high ceiling. So I don't have, like, in a standard head-to-head points lineup, I don't have a lot of interest in France at all. I'd rather go for a Tristan Casas or any kind of sleeper. But if you're talking about a deeper roto league, I'm trying to make an effort in like NFBC style contests to be a little more boring in the middle rounds, because Ty France is, I think he was banged up, and so he ended up only hitting 274. But I think he's a pretty good bet to hit 290 or better. So good batting average stabilizer in that range without killing you in the power categories. Probably going to bat second more often than not in that Mariners lineup. So I do like him for that purpose. Luis Severino's had a really rocky spring, and he's kind of laughed it off, saying, yeah, that's not going to work during the regular season. But given his health history, especially recently, like I kind of need to see him performing. It doesn't seem to bother him, and maybe he'll be fine. But I need to know however many innings he's going to give me, they're going to be productive. So I'm finding myself fading Luis Severino. I want to make sure I do mention Brady Singer, because Brady Singer, like I was saying for Drew Rasmussen and Luis Garcia earlier, I think Singer's maybe the most outrageous example of this. I just don't get why there seems to be so much enthusiasm for him. Yes, he did have a productive season last year, had a good ERA, 3.23 ERA, 1.14 whip, less than a strikeout per inning. So it's another one. Okay, he's not a big bat misser. Not only that, but he has basically just 2 pitches, fastball, slider. Not only that, but he pitches for one of the worst teams in baseball. So even in a best case scenario, how many wins is he going to give you? I just see nothing but regression here. And yet Brady Singer is being drafted ahead of much more interesting pitchers. Reed Detmers for one of them, Jack Flaherty, all of the Mount Rushmore, whatever we're calling them. Like I don't know what Brady Singer has on the Mount Rushmore. Like, he's boring in his own right. I don't really get it. He is working on a changeup this spring, so maybe that opens things up more if he can develop that. But
he did throw the changeup more as the season went on. I think he's one of those guys who definitely benefits from like an arbitrary endpoints look at the season, because basically through the first 3 months, he had a 4.33 ERA. After that, 2.63. So I think he's one of the guys who, tends to get the, like, if you look at it from the second half on, he looks like he took a huge jump. But full season statistics tend to be more predictive than half season. And, he did have more than a strikeout per inning in that second half, in that from July 1st on, but it was 101 and 99 innings. So it's not
negligible difference first half, second half, K per 9.
Yeah. It looks better by strikeout percentage, but still,
True. That's true. Yeah.
Chris, bring us home with a couple of shortstops. Xander Bogaerts, who's now with the San Diego Padres, and Willy Adames with the Brewers.
Yeah, Willy Adames is interesting. Has just kind of like had a lot of discussions last year about Willy Adames. Plays one full season with the Brewers, and we're like, okay, cool, that's who he is now. We know exactly what Willy Adames is, and it's a boring, low-end starting shortstop. And I feel like he might be better than his draft ranking gives him credit for, if only because there just aren't a lot of players who can hit 30 homers, and he seems like a pretty good bet to do that. And, if he gets any regression in the batting average category, I think Willy Adames is someone who, absolutely could take a step forward. Is he cheaper than Jeremy Pena at this point?
No.
Okay, he's right before the Carlos Correa, Jeremy Pena group.
Yeah, his ADP is 90.2,
Yeah.
90.8, and Jeremy Pena is at 118. I have no idea why this is the price tag for Willy Adames. He was the 48th best player in Roto last year, and somehow his ADP just, I don't know. It's like double that, so I don't really get it.
Yeah, like a shortstop who could steal 10 bases and hit 30 home runs. I feel like and there's still, I think, room for him to like improve his batting average and potentially be more like a 260 or 270 hitter. I think there's still some upside there with Willy Adames that it's interesting that there hasn't been more hype around him. Given what he's done since he got to Milwaukee. And then Xander Bogaerts, I just think is such a fascinating player because he's kind of a different player every year. Like one year he'll hit for more power. The next year he'll be, a batting champion or batting title contender. The RBI numbers for him last season were very low, as they were for pretty much everyone in Boston. And the quality of contact metrics, which I know, Scott, you've got. Do you still have Bogaerts as a bust?
I do. Yeah.
I'm
not sure. I'm not sure outside of Boston with the juice ball gone, we can count on Bogaerts for more than like a dozen homers.
I think that's totally fair. He had 15 last year in Boston with a swing that was geared towards the green monster. I think he's a fascinating player because, he had a 2-year stretch where he was actually a really, really good power hitter. That was the peak of the JBE, juice ball era. I like that we're just going to say JBE and then explain what it is. So we're not saving any amount of time. But like, couldn't he give you 190 runs and RBI in this lineup?
Absolutely.
They're talking about hitting him cleanup. It's either he's going to bat cleanup or he's going to bat leadoff probably. So either way,
like
RBI
he could just be like a monster in run production numbers in a way where like it doesn't matter. And he might end up like everything you're saying might be true. He might hit 12 home runs and he still might give you 190 runs in RBI and hit 300 and just be even a value at a relatively discounted price for where he's gone in the past.
Yeah, it's just the shape of the production. That's kind of why I've said it's harder to make the case for Xander Bogaerts being a bust in a points league.
Sure.
Because you don't specifically need home runs. He's going to have good plate discipline. And the run and RBI production should be really good batting either in front of Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis, and Manny Machado or behind them.
And Xander Bogaerts is one of those guys that like, the XBA was like 270 something, I think, or maybe even lower. But like, I don't know if that actually matters for him. It's like Mookie Betts, where like he's kind of always outperformed those expected stats to the point where I just kind of expect that to happen moving forward.
I know we've made this comp before, but I think the price tag for Bogaerts too, it's not egregious at 74.6, but when you can get Carlos Correa 30 picks later, almost 3 rounds, I don't really know that it makes sense or justifies where Xander Bogaerts is going in drafts. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thank you all for watching and listening Fantasy Baseball Today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.